Now, imagine you work for a political party and you've got elections coming up. Do you tell any journalists who ask that A, you're going to do far better than everyone expects, B, that you're going to do much, much worse than that, or C, the truth? Have a look at this.
Well, I'm quietly optimistic that we are turning the corner. I mean, we've done well in real elections over the last 6 months or so.
Well, this is the one in the cycle that's always one of the challenging set of elections. There's a lot of seats up around the country.
I think we're going to make ground in London. I'm hopeful we can make a gain in Manchester. We will come out with net gains, I think, at the end of the council elections when the counting's done.
We're predicting that because these were high watermark years when the seats were last fought in 2014, that it's probably going to be difficult to get anything like as close.
You're downplaying expectations, Andrew Gwynn.
No. Well, time will tell whether those politicians were answering A, B or C as I read them out, but they were probably all engaging in what's known as expectation management. You might not have heard of it, but my guests here in the studio have Giles Kenningham. He used to work for the Conservatives, and Aisha Hazarika. She used to work for the Labour Party. Think of them as recovering spin doctors. That's why you look so well, the two of you. Life is obviously so much better.
Life is good, yeah.
So tell me, what goes on when you're sitting there in the war room, gaming the next election? Do you go out there and go for A, B or C?
I think actually for the Tories this time it's about how do you play Lib Dems and UKIP into the equation. So UKIP could face total wipeout during these elections, and Lib Dems doesn't really seem like they're going to have that revival despite being a pro-Brexit, pro-Remain party in London. So that's where you want to shift it. But yeah, look, it does go on, and I think also what's crucial this time is what happens on the night. How do you set the tests for the opposition? What are the questions on social media, and also what happens the next day? So it's almost about who doesn't say something as opposed to who does say something. The Tories will need to move the conversation on quite quickly, I think.
Right, so how does it work, expectation management?
Well, there's normally a big row about it behind the scenes.
Good.
And all the special advisors get together, and then the small group of politicians who are tasked to sort of be the key political, you know, the Andrew Gwynns or whoever, the James Cleverleys, who will be out on the night doing all the media rounds. And there's almost quite a tussle between the head of communications and the head of communications normally wants to, you know, go out and do quite low expectation sort of management. And there's often, I remember one local elections thing when we had sort of agreed not to give any figures out, and then a senior politician went out and briefed numbers. And that's fatal. You don't want to pin yourself to numbers.
Right.
So take the Labour Party in this election. They should have a stunning night on Thursday. They're set to do very, very well, particularly in London. So they're almost trying to do quite a necessary sort of playing down expectations. And Giles is correct when he says the test is often set by the opposition party. So, for example, in London, Wandsworth and Westminster are being seen as the key measures of success or failure on either side.
And on that basis...
historical context, basically.
Right.
So, yeah.
But on that basis of Wandsworth and Westminster, I mean, is it going to be the case, if you were doing the narrative now, would you be saying, if we hold on to Wandsworth and Westminster, it's been a fabulous night for the Conservatives?
Well, that's what is sort of being said, really.
Yeah, but I think you've got to look at the overall context. What would propel Labour into power? And use comparative narratives here. Also, look at the backdrop here. Incumbent governments don't do well, generally. You know, we've got a backdrop of cuts, we've got a backdrop of austerity. That's where you want to be spinning it in terms of taking a narrative.
But the interesting thing is, local elections are very rarely the things that determine what happens at the next general election.
Well, especially if it's a long way off.
Take last time, so 2014, Labour had a stunning night. We gained 300 seats, we gained 3 councils, and actually that helped feed the narrative that probably Ed Miliband was going to be on course for Downing Street, and we all know that sort of didn't quite work out the way that everybody had planned. So I think you have to take this with a healthy pinch of salt, or a salt mountain, really, in terms of the narrative about what this kind of means for the general election.
But I think ultimately they do matter in terms of getting boots on the ground, getting activists there who can create those community networks which do propel MPs back into power.
Right. I mean, how much of a risk is it when people, or if people think it's all done, it's all in the bag?
It's a huge risk. You've always got to elevate the risk of the opposition getting in, because otherwise people don't go out to vote. Yeah, it's a huge thing. Have
you got any examples of where your narrative worked, where you thought about it, you'd route about it, you finally agreed on something and it worked?
I mean, mine would be the general election 2015, where the whole SNP Labour narrative took over, dominated the airwaves. If we hadn't elevated the risk of Miliband getting in, there'd have been more focus on our policies, and you see the different election.
That was very
in terms of
damaging.
dynamics.
It was very damaging. And actually, the one phrase that everybody remembers that David Cameron said so powerfully was, under Ed Miliband, there will be chaos. And of course, we now look at what's happening in the country and think, oh, the irony. So, I mean, I remember from the Labour point of view, one of the things that, because of course you have these calls that go on through the night as well, or in various staging posts. But I remember one set of elections where we thought we would hold the seat in Bradford, and George Galloway won it, and that was literally like a bolt out of the
And I remember having
blue
that conversation with my old boss, Eric Pickles. We were like, the problem for Labour is they didn't see it coming. It wasn't the fact they'd lost, and that comes down to these elections matter of having boots on the ground.
Right. Well, do you shudder listening to all of this, or does it fill your heart with joy ahead of Thursday?
It's funny, isn't it? Because I'm a new MP, so you think it's not going to be like the thick of it, but then conversations like this, I think it might be.
Is it like the thick of it?
Is it like the thick of it? It's always like the thick of it on steroids.
I'm learning. I mean, I think the thing for me that is really important is also expectation management of the membership. So the Lib Dems have double the membership that we had 2 years ago. It's their first set of big set of elections post the general. A lot of them, it's the first time they've gone door knocking. So yeah, we need to also manage
What
the
do you
expectations.
perceive as success on our
For
Friday
us,
morning?
I mean,
Yeah.
we should make gains, but whether or not
many?
it's going
Come
to
on.
be, I know, I don't even know myself. I'm hoping locally that we'll make a couple of gains.
But
we'll see.
you're doing my job for me. That's great. Come on, give us the numbers.
I
then.
don't have them.
Yes, but can you see the dangers of giving predictions?
Absolutely right. And actually, I'm a pessimist when it comes to campaigning. Even in my own win, I did not believe it until they said it. Until you have the votes in the bag, everything is to play for. You haven't won until you've actually won.
But the Lib Dems are going to be interesting on the evening, because it will be interesting to see whether
It's a rare thing from a Labour spin doctor.
The Brexit vote, whether the kind of anti-Brexit narrative is cutting through, and also where the UKIP voters are going to go, because although we've seen the collapse of UKIP, there's still a lot of people that hold UKIP views, and are they going to go to the Conservatives,
that's what I think the story
and are they
is.
going to go, or are they going to go come to
You think that's where the story is?
Well, I think obviously the media are going to try and frame it as a two-horse narrative, but you could see UKIP annihilation and a fate of the Lib Dems to bounce back.
Well, then it would be a two.
But
Then
listen,
it would be a two.
But also in the sense, if Vince Cable does not come back in London, he's got to be toast. He's got to go, because you're in the most pro-Remain part of the country.
No one's thinking that, actually. No. In the current climate against Labour, with the massive campaigning power of momentum, actually, we're managing our own expectations about we should gain some seats for sure, but I don't think we're necessarily
London's got to be the
expecting to gain
benchmark
councils
for you
or
guys,
whatever.
I think
surely,
the problem
in terms of, like, being
Giles, I think the
pro-Remain.
issue is that Labour
think
is so strong in London. I mean, there's no doubt. Every political analyst will kind of say that the Labour vote is going to be. I mean, there are some areas where the entire council could be completely.
There is a
Labour.
wild
Every
card.
single council seat could go Labour.
Well, that's a risk for the Conservatives, isn't it? If there's wipeout for the Conservatives.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if they lose all of them, obviously you've got Wandsworth, you've got Barnet, you've got Kensington. If they lose all of them, it's not great. I think the challenge for the Conservatives is, how do you move the conversation on afterwards?
And there is
do you let this be hung around your neck like a noose?
Right. I mean, you talked about. Aisha talked about Labour being very strong in London, and you said there've got to be some gains. Do you accept it could be very hard in London?
I think it's going to be very hard everywhere. We've got a very polarised politics right now, which actually makes the centre ground a really difficult place to be, because as soon as you say, if you vote Labour, you're going to get the extreme of the Tories or vice versa, it actually makes the centre ground very difficult. Right. But there is a wild card here, which is EU voters. And this is potentially the last election that EU voters can vote in. And actually, that's where we're focusing.
Well, that's where you're pinning your hopes, isn't it? We're going to talk about this in a minute, so let's not steal the thunder of the next or whenever it is discussion we're going to have. Journalists, persuading them, they know what you're up to. We all know what you're trying to do in terms of telling us what the narrative is. So is it very difficult to persuade cynical journos?
Oh, absolutely. I pity the Labour press office right now, who will be having to ring people saying, you know what, we might not have that good a night in London. It might not be that good. And everybody's like, come on. And I noticed actually Andrew Gwynn at the weekend was sort of trying to downplay some of the
And it looks so obvious.
But I think the only way you
course.
can do it is historical context and third parties. There was a YouGov poll out last week which said Labour were going to get 50% in London. I do think for Labour, if you're going to want to be the party of government, you've got to really take this election by storm.
Right.
It'll be huge gains.
Well, Giles and Aisha, we have to end it there, but you can sit back and watch, can't you?
Well, I'll be commentating
Thursday,
on
Friday.
it.
Oh, all right then. You'll be contributing. Thank you very much for coming in.